we are coming to you today to talk about the big NAR changes and what is going to happen with buyer agency in the real estate field. Getting calls from all of my buyers, Tom. Everybody's asking all these questions, and I'm hoping you can
Yeah.
give some insight into what is going to change. And I think July, right?
In July, yep. And anyone who tells you definitively they know what is going to happen
Right.
is fibbing. They're no better than a talking head that you might see on television
Exactly.
because we don't know. Um,
Right.
we don't know if the settlement is going to be approved in toto.
Right.
I'm speaking to you not just as a real estate broker who owns a brokerage and runs agents. So I have a
Right.
deep interest. But I'm also a real estate lawyer for 37 going on 38 years.
Right.
And my clients include and all have always included agents, brokers, real estate companies, investors, title insurers, every facet of the industry. And I have mediated and litigated hundreds of cases involving buyers, sellers, and the standard MAR forms.
Right. And I'm so excited that you're on here today because I can tell you, Tom, I've never had so much. I'm being flooded with questions that I just don't know how to answer.
Yeah.
So I think if I'm feeling that, and I'm in the business every day, that I can't imagine what buyers and sellers are feeling right now. Um, you know, I've got a whole list of things that are really just being thrown at me that hopefully we can get through today, and hopefully we can give some answers to people. Um,
Yeah. And I'll tell you where I'm coming from today is,
yes,
uh, because the cases are not finalized and the settlement agreements aren't signed, I
yeah,
can't really tell you what these class actions are going to result in.
right.
And the NAR can amend their proposed action based on what is actually proposed or actually approved by the court.
Right, right, exactly. So we're in limbo right now, and that's
We
one
are.
reason, guys, that we need to talk about this, and we need to be open about it, and we need to come up with solutions together. Buyer agency, Tom, in my opinion, is so important, and buyer representation. And I really feel like this, if we're not going to be able to see on the MLS what is being offered by the seller, um, how do we move forward with buyer agency? Like, I understand that we're going to have the buyer sign a buyer agency agreement, which we've always had to do, or at least I've always done with my buyers, and they're going to have to agree to a certain amount, having no idea if that's going to be offered by the seller or not. Is that the new? That's the biggest part, right? That's the biggest change.
Yeah, well, and see, as a lawyer, I will tell you that element has always been there,
Right. Exactly.
right? Because, I get involved in matters sometimes where the buyer's agent comes late to the deal,
Okay.
right?
Which would
So,
be right. That makes sense.
sure, imagine the situation very common. The buyer goes to an open house, or he answers an ad, or he
Right.
calls a listing, and they talk about price, they talk about other material terms. But then when
Right.
it's time to make the actual proposal, they go and hire a buyer's agent. And
After
then,
the fact, correct.
yes, and then the buyer's agent is shocked when the seller's broker says, "I'm not sharing any commission with you."
Right.
Why? Because of that ubiquitous phrase, "You're not a procuring cause." I was
Exactly.
already talking to your client, and what do you bring to the deal?
Right. Right.
And so that element of uncertainty has always existed.
Absolutely.
Oh,
We are taught early on before we're even licensed, in pre-licensing, we're taught about procuring cause and how important it is to, if you want buyer agency, that you have your agent represent you from the beginning to the end. Because regardless of what you do, when you contact a listing agent, you are really talking directly to them. If it's before you've hired an agent, then that does come into effect, and there's nothing that that agent can really do without the listing agreement, or without the listing agent, I guess, agreeing to pay up front, right?
right, right. And
So,
and when that confusion arises, and
Yeah.
I end up in mediation. The deal's
Yes.
done, buyers and sellers are gone. It's now the agents whacking up the pie and are very angry with each other.
Right.
Um, when that happens, blame usually rests with the broker in some failure of training.
Now, what if that buyer broker is signed, Tom? What if that buyer broker is signed and then the buyer goes into an open house without their agent? I mean, that kind of does change it a little bit, because then, of course, they've already signed an agreement with the buyer agent. Um, I mean,
What
it happens a lot. It happens to all of us, I think,
it ha-
honestly.
but I think that even the standard form accounts for that.
Yes, absolutely.
You go if you go rogue as my buyer
Yes,
and walk into a deal, I still get paid.
yes,
And
exactly.
and so,
Exactly.
and again, it comes to communication and counseling. So when 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 this prospective buyer signs up with me, we have a very real heart to heart
Right.
that I am your face, right? If you're going to go to open houses, either me or
Yeah.
someone from my office needs to be standing with you,
Right.
and I have to spin out all those implications.
Or at least we need to call the agent that's going to be at the open house and say,
Yes.
look, my buyer is going to stop by your open house. Is that okay? I mean, it's very easy for that buyer to go to open houses if they choose, and to still be represented by a
Yeah.
buyer agent, even if they want to go with a friend and run around all day and see all the open houses that are available. Just let your agent know, so that your agent can let the listing agent know. Or,
Mhm.
take a business card and say, I'd like to walk through your open house, but I want to make sure you understand I'm represented. I mean,
Yeah.
there's ways around it.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, but Susan, see what you've just described.
yeah,
It is current best practices. We're
right,
not talking
exactly.
about a change. These are the things that agents ought to be doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. They should have been doing it all along. But now we're going to be the big concerns that the big question that I'm getting from my buyers is, am I going to have to pay you?
Hmm.
And and so that comes into play. And that's just a question we can't answer right now, right? Like, I understand that sellers are still going to be able to offer buyer agency commission, but how do we know? Is that something we can even answer yet?
No, we can't.
Okay.
Um, but again, even the failure to include in an MLS listing
Yes.
a promise to share doesn't mean that the big houses are not going to have the equivalent of a side agreement. When you do business with Cummings, when you do business with Keller,
Yeah.
you can count on us sharing with you, even if it's not expressly stated in the MLS.
Right. But how do we know what that amount is? Like,
Uh,
how can it be disclosed? I'm going to give you a scenario that happened a few months ago. I
mhm.
got a call, right? So we're sharing the real estate stories. This is a real situation. I got a call from a seller. She lived in a very nice neighborhood, right? So she was shocked that she wasn't getting any offers on her property. And although she was getting showings, and I think this is important to note, um, although she was getting showings, she wasn't getting any offers. So she ended up calling me and saying, Sue, I'm thinking about, switching agents. Can you talk to me? I don't know why my house isn't selling. So I said, okay. So I started looking into the listing, and the listing said, in buyer agent commission, it said literally, and I'm quoting, buyer agent commission is negotiable. Set your own fee and we'll make sure you get paid. Now, that's the only remark that's in there. So, seller zero is the amount that's being advertised, right? Like, any way you
Yeah,
cut it, every buyer agent that's seeing this listing is seeing a big fat goose egg, right? I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
bottom
Right.
line. So I went to the real estate commission. I went to the legal hotline and I called in and I said, look, all of this is just unknown to me. I don't want to say the wrong thing. What do I do? They responded and said, and I know that this is right now, so we're not saying that this will be the case in July, but thank you for your question. The realtor is correct that commissions are freely negotiable, and that even zero commission on the MLS to a buyer's agent is fine. However, buyer's agents may not attempt to negotiate the commission provide with the seller's agent or the seller. So now the buyer's agent is completely out of asking for commission because it's not on So it's a catch-22. You're not allowed to ask the listing agent for a buyer agent commission, and you're not allowed to ask the seller for a buyer agent commission. So this says
Hmm.
buyer agents may not, again, buyer agents may not attempt to negotiate the commission with the seller's agent. Rather, the buyer themselves may negotiate
Hmm.
the offered commission with only the seller and not the seller's agent. What? How is the buyer
Yeah.
supposed to go knock on the door? Like how can that be?
Yeah. No, that's untenable. And I don't think that's correct
Okay.
because, again, I come at this not just as a licensed broker, but as a lawyer who has to deal with what authority clients give us and what lawyers are allowed to do, right?
Absolutely.
And when two litigants are going at each other, a lawyer can't talk behind the other lawyer's back and go directly to their client.
Right.
Clients can always speak to each other, and the client can always authorize me
Yes.
as to what I can speak to the other side about. They can restrict me and they can grant me.
Okay.
It's no A broker seller or a broker buyer agreement is no different. They are granting authority. And
Okay.
so perhaps brokers need to be amending our listing agreements,
Okay.
okay, or buying agreements to include this facet that
That
says,
this can be negotiated between agents or
correct,
between agent and seller.
yes, and absent your express authority, I cannot go and negotiate this element.
Okay.
And I think it's very easily cured if you have black and white language that says, when I sign up with Sue Curlett, I am expressly granting her the authority to go ask whether the seller will share in the paying of the buyer's agent.
Gotcha.
I
So
think that's entirely appropriate.
you think that maybe the form at some point is going to be revised that allows us to actually seek commission from the listing agent or the seller.
Correct, because
Okay.
everything is a matter of contract.
Right.
Okay,
And right now we cannot do that. Like
no,
right
and
now we're not allowed to ask for commission for a buyer agent at all, according to, the legal hotline. But
unless the client grants you that authority,
okay.
and you've touched on something that has been a pet peeve of mine for years, right?
Right. Right.
And the perceived notion that the MAR forms are sacrosanct and cannot be amended.
Right.
Okay,
Right. Right.
because by regulation, agents can only fill in the blanks.
Absolutely.
All right. And so there are whole pages of text that don't fit any given deal because the documents are meant to apply to everything all the time. And then the addenda subtract operation of things out of the document.
Right.
And things that are not subtracted out of the document remain in force and effect. Um, and there are too many brokers that don't get involved in deals and make the adjustments to the documents that need to be made. But those printed forms
Yes.
can be fully modified. And as a lawyer, when I'm functioning as a lawyer in a deal and not as a broker,
Right.
I tear the forms to shreds. And
Right. Right.
it's sometimes difficult because the agent on the other side isn't used to that.
No,
Doesn't
we'd be
lack
freaking out. I would be
well,
like, what?
yeah, and
So,
they don't
yeah.
have the authority, or their broker isn't available. But by the time my requests percolate to the broker's desk, a deal
Yeah.
is made, the forms get shredded so that they are appropriate to the deal. So, returning to my point about the agreement between the buyer and their
Um,
agent,
correct.
okay, that
Yes.
is merely a pre-printed form. It is
Right.
not it's not biblical. It is not scripture. We don't
Right.
read from the pulpit every Sunday from the book of MAR. It
So
is merely a
we could realistically on the notes section of the buyer agency commission, we could write in just simply that the buyer gives us permission to negotiate buyer agent commission on their behalf. It could be that
correct.
simple sentence and it would work.
Absolutely, and
Okay.
um,
Wonderful.
because what we're dealing with is the perception, and I think this is what the advice hotline was getting at: the perception that you are self dealing, and that even when you get a buyer's permission to negotiate, they don't fully comprehend how self-dealing it is for you to ask someone else, pay me on behalf of my client.
Right. So let's, if we can, let's take a second and just go back and recap and correct me if I'm wrong, because certainly I am not the attorney. Tom is. So he's going to tell me to stop it and he's going to clear it up. But my understanding is that that when you hire your agent to represent you, right, or well, actually, let's just go to the listing side of things. When you sit down as a listing agent, and the standard listing contract does state that there's going to be a certain amount of commission paid to the listing agent. Now, where this confusion came into play, I really don't know. And if you want to feed like into that, Tom, that's great. But originally, when we sit down with a seller and we
Mm-hmm.
fill out the listing agreement, we're basically saying that we're going to charge X amount of money. Then the very next sentence of the contract
Mm-hmm.
says that we are going to share that commission, and
Yes.
it's laid out in what way. So we're going to use a good example. NAR is saying 6% is the average commission in Maryland. If that's the case, and that is completely negotiable, let me state that. But if that's the case, and on the listing agreement, it will then say 3% is going to be retained by the listing agent and 3% is going to be retained by the buyer's agent. So the seller is well aware of how that's going to be dispersed, that real estate fee. Now, the listing agent is able to say, "Oh no, I'm going to keep 4 and I'm going to give you 2, buyer agent." That's completely between the agents. What has been in the past is that we are only allowed to ask for what is listed on the MLS. And this is the big change, everybody. That amount is no longer going to be listed on the MLS. So when you hire your buyer agent and you sit down with them and say, "Hey, this is my minimum. I'm going to request 2.5%, 3%, 3.5%, whatever." That buyer, it may have to pay 0.5% as of right now. If the seller's offering 2%, or the seller's agent is offering 2%. And then, the buyer would be paying an extra 0.5%, 1%, whatever that breaks down to. That's going to be the change. That's going to go away. So now the buyer agent is not going to have any idea, or we don't know how the buyer agent is going to find out what that listing agent is offering in cooperation,
That's pretty
right?
accurate. Yeah,
That breaks it down, right?
that does break it down. And so there's going to be a new way of dealing with each other. Okay.
Right.
And
Right.
and it's going to start with the buyer's agent who signs up a client who wants to go out and look at properties on Saturday afternoon.
Yes.
And there's going to have to be full disclosure about this new reality.
Yes.
And there is the potential for an express authorization in the written agreement,
And that's what we were
which,
talking about earlier, where
yep,
we are asking our buyer to allow us to negotiate our commission.
correct.
Okay.
And on the seller side, the selling broker, when we sign up our clients to sell their houses, we talk about an overall marketing strategy, where we're going to list, how we're going to list, print media, all that kind of stuff. How long
Absolutely.
before we cut the price? And part of that discussion is going to be, while we can't publicize the sharing of commission, do you authorize me to share it with others? And if the answer is yes, now we have to figure out how to communicate that to prospective purchasers and their agents. And what we're going to see, and you've already alluded to this, what we're going to see in the MLS listing is the code words, right?
Okay. Right.
Commission is negotiable, or words to that effect. And
Okay.
we're going to learn over time that when we see a phrase like that in the MLS listing, it is inviting the conversation. I'm inviting you
Between
as the buyer's
agents,
agent to call me.
call you listing agent.
Yes. And
Okay.
so the new normal is going to create new conventions. The new conventions on the buyer side, the contract has to expressly authorize to avoid the prohibition against asking. And on the seller side, they have to develop a language to communicate in writing that it can be negotiated, and thus inviting the call.
So Tom, I already saw, and here's one of my worries, right? This is going to affect, in my opinion, and tell me if I'm wrong, this is going to affect those first time buyers, those people that just, they don't have 20% down or 10% down.
Hmm.
Realistically, the FHA guidelines, as we all know, are, 3.5% down. And then, you've got an average in Maryland, even Pennsylvania, of like 3.5% closing cost. So right now, those people need 7%. They're allowed to get the closing cost paid by the seller. So a lot of
Hmm.
times that's negotiable, where we can say, look, my buyer's ready to go. Here's their loan approval, and they can pay the FHA 3.5% down. Will you cover their closing cost? Now there's caps on that though. On FHA, you can only get up to 6%. And those people that don't have the extra money that would have been asking for that are now going to be adding another set amount, a negotiable amount, to what they have to bring to the table. So it's going to create more grant need. It's going to create different legislation on what can be used for these loans. I mean,
Yeah.
God only knows what's going to happen, right? Like, what is your take on that?
Well, the lower end of the market is going to be the least well served because the
Yeah,
commissions were already pretty thin there.
correct. Yes,
And and while there's lots of great agents at every level of the market, proportionately there's lots of younger agents at that level of the market.
right. And it's
Okay.
going to decline the numbers, right? Like,
And well, hopefully, some shouldn't be agents, quite frankly.
yeah,
There's
yeah.
just there are too many, and there are too many that are unsupervised.
A hundred.
Um,
Oh, I can't agree any more than that. Right.
you know,
That's what this
Susan,
podcast is about. Honestly, it's about helping new agents as well. Like,
correct.
I think I'm reaching a time in my life, Tom, and you've known me for years, right? So
Yes.
I think I'm reaching a time in my life where I see the struggle and I'm able to assist
Hmm.
because I now have the knowledge, right? Like, so I'm so confident and comfortable where I am in this part of my life
Yes.
that when I see hurting people or hurting agents, I do want to offer help. I want to say, hey, look, don't
Hmm.
do that. Do this. You know what I mean? Let me walk you through this. And this podcast is full of my heart. You know what I mean? Like, I truly believe that there's a gap between buyers, sellers, realtors, lenders, title companies, attorneys that needs to be closed. And
Hmm.
this podcast hopefully will do that by educating consumers, buyers,
Yeah.
sellers, whatever, and
Yep.
realtors.
Yes.
So, the big concern is going to be all those people that are going to be affected. And I already saw an ad from a lender yesterday saying, that we're going to be able to negotiate buyer agent commission by some of these grants. Do you think, is that something that's already been established? Because I know a lot of those grants don't permit it.
None of this is established. No.
Right.
The, the,
We have
the,
nothing.
what you read is somebody feeling in the dark with both hands
Right.
until
Right.
they run into some opposition. So
Yeah.
what we may see over the next 5 years is corollary and ancillary litigation
Okay.
as those people who feel they won these class action lawsuits, right,
Yes.
are now they have to guard the industry against the industry's effects to get around the terms of the settlement, to get around the new rules of the NAR. Okay, that's free market. That's capitalism. That's what happens in this country. The government or the industry sets a barrier to making
Yeah.
money.
Help us as realtors. What can we do?
Well, we shouldn't look at July because until there's an announcement that the court
Okay.
has approved the settlement,
Right.
okay, July is just a date on a page. Nothing is going to happen because the NAR isn't going to promulgate anything until the orders are in place because things can change right up until the moment of the judge's approval.
Okay. Got it. Got it. So
And
right now it's business as usual,
business as
right?
usual, but I think we should get used to and should open up dialogues with our clients about this factor because you're going to sign up clients now where the representation is going to extend beyond July.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. 6 months normally.
Deals already made and ratified that will settle after July should not be affected.
Right. Okay. So
Okay.
it'll be grandfathered in. Yeah.
Yep. And if, like us, you're looking at possibilities, you may start recrafting documents and office procedures and training manuals in anticipation of something.
Right.
And even without knowing the exact rules that NAR is going to come down with based on the as approved settlement, it's still pretty easy to revise training manuals and instructions and to teach agents to be more cautious. Why? Because I think the discussions that are going to be required by the settlement are discussions that we should have been having with agents for decades.
Right.
And I think a lot of brokers just got lazy and started signing up people and sending them out in the field um, without even a full understanding of what the pre-printed forms say or mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we deal
Uh,
with it all the time where we're sending things back. And we talk about new agents sometimes and how they go through pre-licensing, they pass their test, and then it's kind of like good luck, see ya. And mentoring and how important all that is. And they know more than the buyers know, right? Like so there
yeah,
are this it's so important for people to understand the contracts, to understand exactly what's going on.
yeah,
And we, I mean, we're for the next few months, all of us are really going to have to tell you that we don't know. As
yeah,
sad as that is, and as hard as that is, that we just don't know and we can't tell you.
yeah.
Um, so everything you're reading, people, everything you're hearing, these are not solid facts yet. So,
No.
don't be upset right now. It's not going to matter. Um, Make sure that you are hiring your buyer agent with an understanding of exactly what could take place and that buyer agent gives you some kind of out. We've talked about that in other podcasts where the buyer agency agreement does have a termination clause. So, don't not hire your buyer agents right now, I think is my advice. Hire them and make sure that you're comfortable with the terms of the buyer agency agreement because there is a termination clause in there that you could certainly be comfortable with.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Yes, yes. Understanding the forms that you're working with. I'll tell you why that's so
Yeah.
important, and I'll tell you by anecdote.
Yeah.
Years ago, I was working with a contractor, and that contractor was in the Maryland Home Improvement Commission on a regular basis.
Okay.
Okay, they were big, and one year I think I had 15 to 20 cases to litigate before the Home Improvement Commission where there were allegations that they had done bad work, badly supervised work.
Yeah.
And so, and their contract was horrible. They had no fine print that described anything.
Right.
And so I very carefully crafted something that protected them and had a change order procedure. If you want a new door, you have to fill out this form. We have to agree on the price. It becomes part of the contract. Great.
Yeah.
8 months later, after implementation, we're still getting the same volume of claims. And so I
Right.
had a meeting with 21 project managers for this company.
Right.
I had, and I asked by a show of hands, how many of you have read the new contract?
100%.
Two guys raised their hands, two of them.
Right.
Everyone else
Right.
just was doing business as usual because they didn't read or understand the contract and
And one
how
of
it all
them
fits together.
one of them was probably lying. You know what I mean? Like, that's the
Right.
honest God truth. I want to look like I read it. Let me raise my hand.
Yeah.
We, as realtors, I think it's important that people understand that this contract, this real estate contract, becomes 45 to 55 pages by the time it's complete in the state. I
Yeah.
mean, very rarely do we have one that's under 40 pages.
Yeah.
So,
And there's no reason for that.
yeah,
It's the idea that um, the industry has to cater to the least common denominator by including every possible contingency, even when you're selling a row house in the city, but you still need wetlands provisions, airport
absolutely.
provisions, etc.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
But if you hire a lawyer who's not getting paid commission, they can craft a document and give it to the licensed realtor on the other side, and they won't understand it
Right.
because they
Exactly.
haven't been trained or they're not
Exactly.
allowed to.
Right. And that's the big thing. I mean, we as realtors, and I'm talking to all of you as realtors out there, are going to have to be very careful. We're not lawyers. I mean, Tom, I can speak for myself, for John, who, wanted to be with us today. We need people like you that are willing to come on here. So I really appreciate you educating us. I have read everything that you could possibly dream of, and a lot of it's not even close to reality. I mean,
Right.
people are coming out and saying, I've read that that prices are going to come down because people won't have to pay buyer agent commissions anymore.
Yeah.
I don't understand that. Like, the reality is that's probably not going to be the case.
I don't
We're
know.
not
And
going to
yeah,
reinvent the wheel.
Susan, I also work with a lot of appraisers.
Yeah.
I don't, and no appraiser has said to me that the value of the brick and mortar will change based on the commission to be paid.
Right. But you can see it all over the news. Like, I
Hmm.
think Channel 11 or somebody I was reading literally put out where prices are going to come down. And I'm thinking, why would that affect pricing at all? Like, it really,
No.
it doesn't. The only thing it's going to do is potentially, in my opinion, hurt the seller,
Yeah.
because the seller is not going to be able to, if they're going to be dead set against paying a buyer agent commission, you're going to have buyers that are kind of flying by the seat of their pants and have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah. Exactly. And so for people who are regular buyers agents, networking is even more important. So they know, for instance, if I'm in a Sue
Absolutely.
Curlett deal and she's representing the seller, she's advising her clients to share the commission. Don't
At
worry.
100%. I will,
Yep.
yeah, you will not hear me say that a seller should not offer buyer
You know,
agency.
the pin is probably where the real deal is made. My law partner taught me something 30 years ago that holds true for brokers and agents. The
Okay.
signed, yeah, and here it is. Here it is. And I'm giving it to you free of charge. All
Thank
right.
you. Thank you. Thank you.
The, the signed contract is the beginning of negotiations.
100%. And I tell
Yep.
my buyers all the time, not yet, not yet. Because they'll be like, I'm so excited. I am so excited. I'm going to, I'm
Yep.
furniture shopping and I'm doing all this and I'm doing all that. And I'm like, well, don't buy anything and stop with the excitement. I need you to stay happy that we found a house that is a really nice one for you. But until we're through, we're not through. Until those keys are in your hand,
Yeah.
don't get your heart broke if this doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
those inspection addendums and the
absolutely.
repair clauses are everything.
Right. And it's changed this year. So,
Hmm.
the buyer does have the right to say, no, I don't want the house anymore after I've had the inspection. So sellers can't get too excited until they know.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's very important, Tom, and if you don't mind expressing and backing me up on this, um, buyers who think it's okay to go to the listing agent and treat them as if they represent you, they do not, and they legally cannot. They
That that
represent the seller.
that is correct, and they should disclose that to you. That's a matter of ethics.
Right,
And I will confess that when I was a first time home buyer in my 20s, I didn't know that distinction.
right, right. A lot of people don't.
No, and then when I was offered the dual agency where someone in that same shop was going to represent me, I was
Yeah,
confused. But
right.
I was talking to this guy, and now you want me to talk to this guy.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
that is a and then there's the perception. Even when dual agency is done correctly,
Yeah.
if I know that the person in the next office over from you is going to speak for me to you, that just doesn't feel right.
Right. So now, people that are outside of Maryland, your laws are going to be a little different than what we're talking about. But dual agency, just to simplify, means that the broker, not the agent, but the broker can have access to both sides of the transaction. So if we used HomeSmart, who is where I am, if my broker at HomeSmart, um, if I had an open house and somebody came into my open house and they said, "Hey, Sue, I really like this house, but I'd like to be represented." I could go to my broker and say, can you assign an agent to represent this buyer because they like buyer representation? My broker can then make that introduction, and my broker has access to both sides. They're the dual agent, not me, not the buyer's agent that they represented, but just the broker. So, trying to keep it simple for understanding. Would you agree that that is the term?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and I think that the existence of dual agency like we have in Maryland um, is the biggest concern to be addressed by this class action settlement and the new rules.
I
You know,
agree.
it's almost impossible to overcome the perception of self-dealing by a broker who has two agents representing both sides of the transaction, and the
Yeah.
brokerage is getting the full 6%.
Right. Now, and keep in mind that the fear is that the buyers, they're not, if they don't have the money and they don't have somebody helping them, how do they know? How do they
Yep.
know? You know what I mean? Like you need help. You can't do this on your own, buyers. Like you really can't. And if you trust the listing agent, that's okay. But you need to understand that the listing agent has a legal responsibility. Correct me if
Mm-hmm.
I'm wrong, Tom, has a legal responsibility to tell the seller everything. If I go to the listing agent and I say, look, you know, I'm really, I want to come in at full price. I'm going to give you a scenario, Tom. You're the listing agent, right? I come to you and I say, hey, Tom, look, I don't have the money to pay my buyer agent, so I'm just going to buy it on my own. And I want to offer full price, but if I have to, I'm going to go up $10,000.
Yep.
You, as a listing agent, right? Now
Right.
you know I'm willing to go up $10,000. You
Yep.
have to tell your seller.
It is a classic example where I've
Yep,
got to tell this prospective buyer that this isn't a secret anymore.
correct.
Yeah.
Right. Now the seller has to know, and you have to legally tell them because you represent that side.
Yep. Yep. And,
So
and
for
lawyers
me,
have the
that's
same
the biggest
lawyers have the
concern.
same restrictions.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to know too, because then you're responsible for telling them. So, yeah, I mean, it's really just until you hire a buyer agent, and this is super important, until you actually hire a buyer agent, they do not represent you. You have to have that contract in place, that buyer agency agreement in place, because that way the buyer is hired and represents you on your side only.
Absolutely.
Correct?
Absolutely. Yep.
So that's the biggest worry that I think everybody's going to have.
But all of these concerns that you've expressed
Yeah.
are remedied with a thorough and ongoing educational process for new and moderately experienced agents.
Right.
You
Right.
know, because the majority of the folks that you know in the business for 15 plus years know all of this and they practice this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I
But
couldn't believe that the lawsuit actually went through. I mean, I
yeah,
was dumbfounded.
mm-hmm,
Because I've done it right. I learned the right way. You know what I mean? My first broker was an attorney. So for 6 years, he read everything that was in every contract I wrote. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
um,
yeah,
I think working with an attorney is a great way to get started out there, realtors. Find a broker that also really understands the contracts and learn them well.
yeah.
Um,
I'll give you
New
an
agent.
anecdote. I'll give you an anecdote where this goes horribly off the rails. We litigated a case last year where a gentleman took the test and became an agent and signed up with a broker. Got
Okay.
zero got zero oversight
Right.
and did one deal in which his family was involved, his companies were involved, and when
Mm.
he did it, he cheated his family and moved an interest in property over to his own company. He took the
Oh,
full
geez.
he took a commission and didn't share it with the broker. So he cheated the broker, cheated the participants, and when we deposed him, and it was a very
Yeah,
painful deposition for him,
I'm sure.
it was the only deal he ever did, and he became a licensed agent only to do that deal and take the commission. And we deposed
And
his
had no
broker.
idea.
No, he did this all intentionally. And we deposed the broker who
Yeah,
provided no supervision, was shocked that this deal had happened, and was shocked that
well,
nobody had shared the commission with him. But
yeah,
guess what? Even after the case resolved, that agent
yeah.
is still with that broker. And so
So
there's two
I
things there. There's
think that that's a
oversight, training, and personal ethics. All
right.
failed in that instance.
So Tom, I'm so glad you're sharing this story because it really does make me think about something that I think about all the time. And that is brokers will keep anybody. Like
Hmm.
brokers will allow you to hang your license in their office. And, we see it on teams too, where you might have a really big agent that has 30, 40 people that are working directly under them. And they would be the team lead.
Yes.
In that case, that person is really only allowing some of their team members to do one little part of the transaction. Maybe that team leader or that team player is the one that shows the houses. And then they try to go out on their own and they have no clue how to handle
Mm.
the entire transaction. So
Right.
there's so many things that can take place. Um, that it's super important that buyers, you find an agent that you're really comfortable with, that you can trust, and that has the experience and knowledge that we talk about all the time.
Yeah.
Would you say that a buyer's representation is as important as the listing side? Like, I
Yeah.
think it's more important personally.
It's more important because the predicate for every contract is buyer beware, right?
Buyer
Caveat
beware.
emptor.
Yeah.
And the law recognizes your absolute God given right to make a bad deal. The law recognizes your God
Couldn't have
given
been
right,
said better.
yeah, to ignore good advice.
Yeah.
Okay. There are cases that say if you are above a certain age, and I think Maryland, it's like 7 years old or 13 years old, you're considered to have read something presented to you. Okay.
Wow. Right.
And it is not a defense for an adult who's not on medication, who is competent, to say, yeah,
Right.
I signed this 14-page document, but I only scanned it. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You are
Yeah.
presumed to know the content and the general meaning.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
and so if we hear it in the context of criminal law, ignorance of the law is no defense. On the civil side, it's the same thing. And
Yeah.
so the seller, if the buyer has no agent, the seller is controlling all of the terms, and all of the terms are going to be seller loaded, seller favoring.
And important for this, what Tom's saying is to keep the important thing to keep in mind right now when he's saying that is to remember the listing agent represents the seller's interest only. They cannot legally represent both sides.
Yep.
So buyer agency is like what's on the line right now.
Yep.
Everybody's talking about how this big difference is going to take place. And I don't believe it for a second. I don't think we're going to see that big of a difference because for the first year, we probably will, right? People are going
Right.
to think they don't need representation and we're going to see an influx. You're probably going to be very busy because buyers are not going to know what they're doing and they're going to start hiring attorneys because
Yeah.
the seller should have done this, seller should have done that.
Yeah.
It's going to be a mess.
There, but
So,
there's also an element of self-regulation here. Okay.
okay.
Because I believe a majority of people are fair and moral, and whether you're a
I
seller
agree.
or a seller's side agent, you're going to treat people fairly on the other side, and you're going to
Yeah.
recognize somebody needs to pay them a fair wage. That's one thing. Second of all,
Yeah.
uh, bad deals, horrendous deals where the buyer has been unfairly taken advantage of. Notice I use the qualifier unfairly. It's okay to take
Yes.
advantage, but
Yeah.
unfair advantage leads you to a courtroom.
Right.
And the
Right.
threat of litigation and having uninsured losses that you must pay, loss of reputation, these are people that cheat me.
Yeah.
The expense of being engaged in litigation. Every hour in deposition is an hour that my client is not making money selling something. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those things exist as further checks on greed and bad behavior. And,
Absolutely.
and so I think a majority of sellers and their agents and brokers are self regulating in those respects and aren't going to go overboard.
Right. Right. I think that this is going to affect more of the middle to lower to middle income families than it is going to be for the 1%. You know what I mean? Like
Correct.
if you're selling $1 million house, you're not going to want that buyer to come in unrepresented, because you do open yourself up to, um, to litigation down the road where the buyer says, oh, well, I didn't know I had to have a home inspection in 7 days. I didn't
Hmm.
know how to write the contract. I mean, how are buyers going to write a contract?
Yeah, I
This simple, right? Like, how
right.
are they even going to do that?
The most difficult cases that I have as a lawyer are where the other side is unrepresented by another lawyer.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, right? This has been such a good solution where the seller has the right. The seller's always had the right, by the way, to not pay a buyer agent commission.
Right.
The seller's always had the right to not pay a listing agent. Like, we do not have a required rule that says you have to hire a realtor at all. You can go put a for sale by owner sign in your yard and try to figure out how to write these 45 pages and try to sell to a buyer's agent. We find it often, but as a buyer's agent, because I definitely represent buyers as well. As a buyer's agent, when I'm on the buyer side and I see a for sale by owner, then I'm just shaking my head, because I know that I'm going to have to sit down and teach this seller everything. Even
Yes.
though I represent the buyer, I'm going to have to teach the seller every paragraph in there. So I'm doing both jobs, sadly. Even though I don't represent the seller, I represent the buyer. They just don't have the experience to know how to do it.
Right.
So it's
Yeah. That's
easier.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Susan, recently, my partner in the brokerage, who is my son, um,
Yeah.
he was on the yeah, yeah, he was on the phone with a client selling a high value property, but we had to explain the contract to the client, and it
Yeah.
was more than an hour conversation while the client was driving down the coast of Italy with the top down.
Oh my God. Right? Like, the stuff we hear, the stories we share, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Um, and they just don't know. So here is the biggest transaction that anybody is ever going to make in their life, chances are. I mean, there's some in that 1% that will go buy $1 million yacht.
Yeah.
Yes, that's not, anything that I'm going to be working with, but there are transactions that are going to be second, third properties. But for the majority of
Hmm.
people buying their first primary residence, they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And to think that they could go in and make this kind of purchase on their own,
Sure.
is just not well advised.
And let me let me
It's
give you a couple of let me give you a couple of examples of that. A large
please,
part
yeah,
a large part of our real estate litigation practice deals with fraud on the part of sellers, not
yeah,
necessarily the agents. And
100%.
I've had several cases in Baltimore City where folks have bought houses that were flipped during the pandemic, during
Okay.
a time when the city was allowing um, deeds to be recorded without use and occupancy permits and closed out inspections because they didn't have the inspectors, and they had
Wow.
COVID
Right.
restrictions for personal visits to the homes. And all this was supposed to catch up. And so we have people living in houses that have been improved. They paid 300,000 or 400,000. There's no use and occupancy certificate,
Wow.
or
Wow.
nobody checked in one instance those support stars you see on the outside of a brick home that indicates that
Yeah.
someone has engineered. They're just glued on. They're not connected to anything. Or
Wow.
the deck in the back is floating on four legs. It's not connected to the house,
Right.
right?
Right.
These are
Right.
frauds of the seller perpetrated on unknowing buyers, taking advantage of loopholes in the system. And without a
100.
knowledgeable buyer's agent or a lawyer, right?
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
these people at that level of the market are going to get fleeced.
And I think that while we're on this topic right now, when you talk about a buyer's agent, an experienced buyer's agent, a lot of times they are asking us for lenders that we've worked with
Mm-hmm.
previously. They're asking us for home inspectors. They're trying to get in our network of people,
Yeah.
people that we've worked with for years and years and years that we're comfortable with. So not only are you getting the buyer agent experience, but you're also getting the people that are in their network, or at least being introduced to.
Yeah.
I never introduce somebody to one. Like, very rarely do I refer contractors or movers. Those are
Yeah.
the two that end
Mm-hmm.
up causing trouble.
Yeah.
you know?
So Susan, here's two situations that we're litigating now. Okay, that
Yeah,
involve agents who have recommended contractors. Okay,
100%. Right.
the general inspection detected dark coloration on the wall in the basement, suggesting possible mold. Agent
Okay.
agent found a mold remediation company. Mold remediation company went in. Nobody was there to watch their work. They gave an invoice. Okay, the seller
Okay.
paid the invoice. The invoice was given to the buyer and the buyer's agent. Okay, when they moved into the house, they still had water infiltration. They pulled back some wall board in the basement. There was mold. There had been no remediation.
Wow.
That's now in litigation. All right. Now roll
Yeah.
forward to another example. The inspector gave a clean bill of health to the HVAC system. Everything is fine until the winter months. They turn on the unit. Nothing happens. It wasn't connected to the electrical system.
Unbelievable.
And we
And the
have,
seller had to know that. I mean,
right.
in
But
the
but the
winter months,
but they feel that they're
you can't
buffered
really
because there was
consider
an
it.
inspection. The
Yeah.
inspection is relied upon by the seller as a buffer to liability, saying, "Well, I said the house is as is, so you can't accuse
Yeah.
me of hiding anything. You had your own inspection."
Yeah.
Well, if
Yeah.
you, as buyer's agent, are recommending a bad inspector, that
Yeah.
argument
Set
gets very
yourself up.
complicated because now maybe the inspector's conduct caused your loss and not the seller's fraud.
Right.
And things get
Right.
very hazy in mediation, which you have to do before litigation, and then the resulting litigation. And
Yeah.
all of this has the potential to snowball if less people, or that not less, if fewer people are represented by competent agents as a result of this class action settlement.
Yeah, it's going to be, it's going to be so important for people to understand, um, just how important it is, buyers, to have someone represent you. Even if you have to pay it, what's going to happen, in my opinion, and I think this, if it trickles down to this, there's going to be all kinds of changes. There's going to be grants, which means higher interest rates. I mean, like people have to understand that when a grant comes along, it's not going to be at the same rate 99% of the time as if a rate that you had the money down. They're looking at it going, okay, well, if you put 5% down, 10% down, 20% down in a conventional loan, you've got meat in the game, right? Like
Right.
you've got some money in there. If you are putting zero down because you have a grant, the government's going to back you up because your credit score is high enough, but they're not going to back you up without charging you a little bit more to make sure that if that loss occurs, that they're covered.
Yeah.
So, again, sellers, hear us. It's very important that you remember, and I don't want to overstep, so correct me if I'm wrong, that paying your listing agent, and I'm going to be very careful in how I say this, paying your listing agent X amount and telling your listing agent, I want X amount to be offered to a buyer's agent, is going to protect you as well.
Yes. And perhaps building on a suggestion that we talked about earlier, because again,
Yeah.
we're all thinking about this as we go.
Yeah. We don't know.
If we're going to ask buyers to authorize the buying agent to ask directly, will there be a sharing of compensation? Then perhaps the seller ought to expressly authorize their broker to entertain and invite the question, right?
Right. Right.
Is where organizations are having discussions with other organizations about where those fees should be, right? Because that smacks of
Yeah.
antitrust, and that was the core of what they were trying
Of
to
the
solve. So,
right.
so within a brokerage, at a training session, you probably won't hear a seminar on here's the commission we will share with others, and you should communicate that. I
Yeah.
don't think you're going to
Right.
have that
Like,
level of training because that would be, I think, an antitrust violation.
right. So it's going to be super scary for realtors on both sides to manage this. And until we know, and until the lawyers that are smarter than me come out with these ideas and educate us in how to best represent you, um, these are the things that are going to be super important to know, that these attorneys, you got to know what you can and what you can't do.
Yeah.
So right now, if I'm correct and I bring us up to date, we should be able on the buyer broker agreement to put a paragraph in there that just simply says, I blah 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 representing blah
Hmm.
blah blah am authorized to ask for buyer
Yeah.
broker compensation, period. So Tom, thank you so much for joining me today and all the information that you've provided. I'm certain that I'm going to be asking you to join us again in a few months, but providing this information to buyers and sellers right now is super important. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your telling us everything that we know. And most importantly, I appreciate you agreeing that we just don't know yet and that
Yeah.
nobody needs to freak out yet.
Yeah. No, don't freak out. And I sit on the GBBR education committee, and there are
Okay.
lots of good courses in the works. Our committee is
Okay.
considering what are we going to do in the fall. So
Perfect.
the education is coming, and I encourage new agents to take all the education they can, and
Excellent.
you'll meet good people in the classroom as well.
Excellent.
All right.
Tom, again, thank you so much. Have a great day and we'll get back to you. And if anybody has any questions for Tom, certainly put them in the comments and I will see if he will answer them for you on the next episode. Thank you so much. Take care. Tom, thanks again. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.